do.
All right, well, moving on, checking in on charter school reform here in Michigan. Since the Free Press did a series of reports on more oversight for school authorizers, well, this week, State Superintendent Mike Flanagan said he is warning authorizers that new charters won't be given if school performance doesn't measure up. The department will look at academics, transparency, financial practices at the charter schools. Now, both people on the charter school debate, proponents for charter schools and people who are not fond of charter schools, say this is a great move. But didn't the superintendent have this ability all along?
Sure he did. And you know, it's interesting. Ingrid Jacks has a column in our paper today talking about this issue, and she notes that 88 charter schools have been shut down by their authorizers for poor performance. Very few public schools, if any. No public school has been shut down for poor academic performance. We just had the Michigan Merit Exam results come out and the ACT exams. We have 4 full school districts in Michigan, Ecorse, River Rouge, Westwood, and Highland Park, that didn't graduate a single kid college ready. I think Mike Flanagan's got bigger problems than charter school authorizers in this state.
What did you think when Mike Flanagan came out this week?
Well, I mean, I think this is the right move, and it's got to be complemented by the legislature and the governor saying, look, we're spending $1 billion a year on this experiment, which was proposed as an experiment 20 years ago. I can remember.
Do you really think it's still an experiment?
Well, I think it is I will put it this way. I think it's unproven in aggregate in terms of what effect it really has on education in the state. There are some great charter schools in Michigan. There's no question. My kids go to one of them, and so there's no greater imprimatur of support than that. But at the same time, there's a charter school across the street from my house that I would not send my children to and wouldn't want anyone else to be.
Which public school in the city would you send your kids to?
The public school in our district is the highest performing school
in the state. So why don't you send your kids there?
I can't get my kids in. It's oversubscribed. I mean,
charter schools aren't the problem. There are a few examples. The Free Press did a very good job of citing those few examples of poor performing charter schools, of charter schools that are abusing their trust, but they also have been a life raft for a large number of kids, particularly in urban areas. And if you look at the number of kids they've taken and graduated and given at least a chance, are they all where they need to be? No, it's still an ongoing process. But education in Michigan is mediocre at best, and is more likely should be considered a failure when only 17% of the kids graduate college ready. Problem isn't charter school or too much choice. The problem is institutional failure across the board. And to single out charter schools,
well, I mean, it's not about singling out charter schools. Let's remember how these were pitched, right? When John Engler came to the Free Press 20 years ago to try to get our support for this legislation, he said 2 things were going to happen. One was that this would increase dramatically the quality choices that people in places like Detroit would have.
And they have.
That's unproven. I mean, there are some better choices.
Absolutely.
Well, these are choices that I have to make. I'm saying most of them are not acceptable.
Some aren't. Most of them are doing
the other thing he said. The other thing he said was going to happen was that this would make the public schools better. That introducing competition into the marketplace would raise the level of performance of the public schools. There is no question that in the district where I live, in Detroit, that hasn't happened at all. The public schools are worse than they were 20 years ago. And so I think if we're going to evaluate charters, this was taking public money spent for a constitutional purpose and giving it to private operators who we were told would perform a certain way. It's perfectly reasonable to look at what we've gotten out of that after 20 years, and I think there's no question that we're coming up short.
No, there's no question it's reasonable to look, but most charter schools are meeting their mission. They are improving. They didn't come out the gate where they're going to be in 5 or 10 years, but most of them are showing good progress.
Well, they've had 20 years.
They're graduating more children. The difference between a charter school and a public high school in Detroit is they keep their children through 9th and 12th grade. The dropout rates are very, very small. Their their discipline problems are very, very low, much fewer teen pregnancies.
Kick a lot of kids out.
No, they don't.
Hang on,
they
but I think also then if you're starting to talk about timing, you're talking about 5 years, 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
20 years that we've been involved with charter schools here in the state of Michigan. How much longer, I guess, do you give certain schools? Do you put time limits on
Well,
them?
you've given the public
schools.
schools 100 years and they're still
But the
failing.
difference, there's an important difference there,
What
right?
is it?
There is a constitutional mandate that the state of Michigan has to provide an adequately funded education for all kids. That is where the notion of public schools come from. Public schools perform a lot of other duties other than just existing, and so you can't close a public school. People have to be able to go to school.
So when you got, you
I'm not
used the
saying
word
you're-
adequate, Steve. When you've got a statewide public school system that's graduating fewer than
Agreed.
20% of its kids
That's where
prepared
we
to do
agree.
anything meaningful in life,
Yeah.
is that an adequate education?
not.
And if not, then
But
you
the
have to try other
alternative-
things. And charter schools, for the most part, are working for
But
these
Is that the
kids.
school? Is that the curriculum? Is that the teacher?
Here's the thing:
who
you
knows?
can't
Could be the
close.
parents.
You can't close public schools because you have to have a school for people to go to particularly in places like Detroit,
So
where
no matter how big of
No,
a failure factory, you've got to keep that school open. You
I think you
absolutely
have to.
don't under Michigan's.
I think you have a different
under Michigan
obligation. I
law.
think you have a different obligation to make public schools work and perform than you do with
So
charter
you have
schools,
a higher
which are.
tolerance for failure in a public
It's not.
school.
That's not what I'm saying. What
It's
I'm
a
saying
different-
is that
is
you
it a
have
different
Where was
standard?
Flanagan this week saying, okay, what are we going to do about Ecorse, River Rouge, Westwood?
We've been
Highland
having
Park?
those arguments for
What are
30
we going
years
to do
in
about these
in,
schools that
Michigan.
don't graduate a single child
Agreed.
with an adequate education?
The answer is to
Where's the
fix
scrutiny there?
The answer is to fix them, and we've been having that argument for a long time in Michigan.
The
Charter
beauty of charter
schools
schools
are-
is that parents have, the parents have a choice. They're not stuck, they're not locked in this public school. They can choose. If they feel that charter school is failing their child, they can get them out.
That's a false choice
right
in a
then.
lot
But
of
if that's
places
supposed to be a
like
choice,
Detroit.
shouldn't
That's
it be a
it's
good choice?
We know what.
Well,
we know
and
what
for the most
choice
part,
is.
they are.
We know how choice works in places like Detroit, where transportation is still a huge issue. Most parents in Detroit do not have a choice of just sending their kids to whatever school there is. You also have.
Well, half of them do. I mean, half of them opted out of the Detroit public schools.
Hang
which
on,
is a
finish.
series
You
of-
also
Finish,
have,
Steve.
You also have the issue of who gets taken into some of these charter schools, and let's not pretend that some charter schools don't cherry pick kids and don't
Well,
deal with.
Wait. By
don't
law,
deal
they have
with-
to do it by a blind draw lottery. You know
They
that.
put kids out at higher rates than public schools do. They don't deal with kids with special needs
I don't think
in the
that's
same
true.
way that the public schools do.
They have to take in special needs kids if they are selected in the lottery.
But they don't.
They absolutely
don't,
do.
We all know the stories about kids who are locked out of that system, and that's why the public
don't know
schools.
that.
That's why the public schools exist. That's why we have to invest in making the public schools better. That is the
Okay,
constitutional
Highland Park,
mandate.
we've invested in that for how many years? They have the highest per pupil funding in Metro Detroit, and they
Mostly
didn't
because
graduate.
mostly because of restricted federal funds. I mean,
It's
you never,
still money.
You never,
It's still money, Steve.
but
It's
it's money you have to spend certain
It's
ways.
still the highest amount of money per pupil, and they didn't graduate a single kid.
All right, I'm gonna end on one last thing
Mm-hmm.
here because this obviously is a great discussion that's been happening all over the state since the series came out in the Free Press. This week, the president talked about, and Arnie Duncan, Secretary of Education, talked about getting better teachers in poor performing districts. Do you think that that's also part of this puzzle here?
There's
as
no
well?
question. You got to get the highest quality teachers into the most desperate public schools in the situation, and we don't have a system that's even remotely set up to do that, to attract those teachers there or to give them the support that they need once they're there. There's a lot of work to do with the public schools, but the answer. The idea that the answer to criticism of charter schools is, well, the public schools are failing too, is absolutely false, because we were sold on the idea that charter schools were supposed to make everything better, and they have not.
They are making education
They're
better
making
for
some
a lot
things
of
better,
families.
but they have
and
not done what they were promised
They've
to do.
saved a lot of kids from a life of despair.
They have.
Kids who would have otherwise dropped out are now on a better route. They've saved a lot of children.
They have.
And I think you have to credit.
But the indictment of the
credit them.
public schools is an indictment of the mission of charter schools, because again, we were sold on the
Indictment of
idea.
education across the
Well,
state.
but the idea is that we were sold on the idea that charter schools would make all schools better, and they have not done that.
All right, this is a good discussion, and I'm glad that it's happening, and I'm sure we're going to have it a lot
Let's
more
hope
before.
we have it in the fall when the legislature gets
I was just
back.
going to say, when the legislature gets back and the kids get back inside the classroom.